Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Blood Red Podcast. The average age of the Blood Red Podcast has been significantly reduced this afternoon. I'm stepping in for Joe Rimmer. I'm joined by Paul Gorst and Ian Doyle to make up a midfield three.
Didn't expect that to be the opening salvo.
Well,
I'll go with it.
And to be fair, me and Gorst did the last one, so in fact the average age has decreased significantly.
And Theo did the one before that, so
Well,
I'll do the hard yards and you guys do the tap-ins. How does that sound?
Yeah, I'll take that.
We've done our bit. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Feels like we have done our bit.
Yeah, we have.
We're
Yeah,
very tired
exactly,
towards the end of the season.
So,
I'm not being rude, by the way. I am just putting our podcast on my various social feeds. I'm not just
I'll start
scrolling on my phone like a certain Liverpool number 9 was throughout the game yesterday, shall we say.
Doyle, I'll start with you.
I thought you weren't going to mention that. Anyway, go on.
I'll try again. Doyle, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
How's things?
I'm okay, actually. I'm okay. Just it's nearly over, isn't it? So thank goodness for that.
A long season.
It has, although it has been the same length as every season, but for some reason this one seems to be going on a bit longer for some reason. And it's a bit odd because Liverpool are now 31,000 points clear at the top of the table. You'd think that people might want to enjoy it, but no, we have to moan about everything.
There can be no enjoyment in this world, do we?
We don't. Yeah, well, apparently so. Apparently loads of people on social media, they're not winning it by enough to... Anyway, go on, sorry.
Anyway, that's today's Blood Red Podcast. Gorsty, how are you?
I'm good, yeah.
More jovial than Doyley?
Yes, I mean, as a general rule of thumb, I am more jovial than Doyley.
That is such an outrageous thing to say.
Not sure. But yeah, no, I am good. Yeah, Liverpool are now within 6 points of winning the Premier League. They could actually be champions on Easter Sunday, which would be
excellent.
Wouldn't it?
Quite the resurrection, you could say.
Well, there we go.
Oh, come on now.
They have
risen.
Come on. But I don't think it'll come down Sunday. But I do think now that it is sort of bottlenecking into a late April title triumph at home to Tottenham. We shall see. But I think even the most pessimistic of Liverpool supporters are now finally believing and accepting that their name will be on the trophy. So, yeah, what an incredible season it's been.
Absolutely. And before we get into today's episode, a quick shout out to our sponsors, NordVPN. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred, and our link will also give you 4 months extra on a 2-year plan. And there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee.
Can I just say, well done?
How smooth was that?
You didn't get put off by me celebrating either.
That's the smoothest
that was
I've
good.
ever done it. So if people don't subscribe off the back of that, what hope have we got?
I think they need to rate us, though, with high ratings, 4 or 5, or press the bell.
Yeah, or ring the bell, is it? Or
press the bell.
Press the bell.
You don't ring it.
No. Doyle, Liverpool 2, West Ham 1. Liverpool just 2 wins away, maybe even less, from the Premier League title.
Yep.
Another win at Anfield yesterday. Thoughts on the game?
I mean, okay, first of all, they won. And that's the main thing. Second thing is they won. And that's the main thing. That literally is just the only thing that matters now. Is when you get to this point of the season and you're challenging for the title, it literally is just about winning games. And of course, the weird thing about it is that some Liverpool fans are getting nervous that they're only 13 points clear at the top, and I'm not quite sure why they're getting so worked up about it. I mean, they only need 6 points from the last 6 games. Well, they only have to technically win 1 game. That's beat Arsenal. That's it, right? But it almost certainly will be decided before then. Also, partly because Arsenal quite clearly cannot hack being in the Champions League and challenging for the title. And the reality is, Liverpool would, had they drawn anybody, I think, if they'd drawn anybody in that round of 16, apart from Paris Saint-Germain, they'd still be in the competition now, as far as I'm concerned. And even then, they only lost it on penalties.
Yeah.
So that shows you that it's taken a while to get over that. But I keep on seeing things about Liverpool stumbling towards the line and this, that, and the other. So I went and had a look at the form guide. Over the last 5 games, only Wolves have taken more points than Liverpool. I think there's 4 teams that have taken 12 from 15. And Wolves are on their best record in the top flight since 1972, which is that long ago. Even I wasn't born then. And if you go on to 10 games, the last 10 games, Liverpool are like 4 or 5 points clear of everybody else. It's like, well, hang on.
4 points clear of Arsenal, 23 from 30.
So it's like, hang on. So what defines stumbling? And you might say, well, look at the performances. And yes, some of the performances haven't been particularly brilliant. But you asked me about the game on Sunday. And the one thing that Liverpool started the game very well and scored. Didn't get the second goal. West Ham with not much to play for, although at this stage of the season, that is a myth. They're always playing for something. They could still technically go down, I think. But also they're playing for their futures because they've got a manager who's coming halfway through the season and they want to actually do something. And of course for them, it's a big deal because they're playing a team that's probably going to be champions. And they want to be seen to, like Fulham did last week. Look at the celebrations Fulham had when they won. And this is a West Ham team that won at Arsenal not that long ago, which of course was, as we've mentioned quite a few times, you believe is you're probably right in saying it's not the turning point, the defining point of the title race. Now, Liverpool didn't really know what to do in the second half, I think. I think that they were caught in two minds, whether or not just to kind of stick and, because they just know they just need the points now. It isn't about performances. And they kind of got a little bit lost in it all. Didn't know what to do. But look what happened the minute it went to 1-1. They just went, right, well, we're not having this. And within about 2 or 3 minutes,
flipped, wasn't it?
Because they knew they didn't have to win, but they knew, no, we've already won this game once. Let's just go and win it again. And they managed to do that. And you got someone like McAllister, who, anyone who reads my ratings, I'm always giving him high ratings because he's very, very good. And he's someone who stepped up in the last couple of weeks. And he led that. And anyone, as I say, who's complaining about stumbling towards the line, it's like, what do you want? What exactly more do you want? Liverpool, if they win 5 of the remaining 6 games, will be on 91 points, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. And how many teams have won the league with more than 90 points? It's not loads.
Or 4.
Exactly. They'd be on 94, actually, I think, would they?
No, if they win, lose one of them, for example.
Oh, sorry, okay, yeah.
So I'm not even saying win all the remaining games. No, even if they win 4, draw 2, they're still going to get 90 points. So it's like... That's at the start of the season. You just said Liverpool get 90 points and win the league by 10 points. You'd be like, wow. You won't be saying, oh, but look at that. They could have done this, that, and the other in this game. It's like, grow up.
I think there's been, I think I've said
Sorry, I'm getting me soapbox here, but yeah,
I've said it throughout the whole season, Gus, and I think you guys probably, said it as well, but I think those kind of recent title charges with Manchester City, you think of 18, 19, you think of 21, 22, so I think they've kind of skewed the perception of, what it actually takes to become champions, and when they don't always go. How often does the Premier title race go down to the final day? It's not happened a great deal, has it recently?
No,
and I think that's kind of skewed expectations, and maybe it does feel too easy. But you think of the times when Liverpool have won the Premier League recently, 2020, they were 18 points clear when lockdown hit. I think were they
25?
When lockdown
hit, yeah.
Ended up winning
won it by 18 in the end. Yeah, Doyle's right to highlight Arsenal's inability to be able to sort of compete on both fronts, and a lot of it is maybe to do with having more of a foot in the Champions League camp than still believing that they can win the league. But it shows you how well Liverpool did in 18-19 to go, with the last day of the season with City, wasn't it? 97 points, was it, that season? And then to not win the Premier League and then go and win the Champions League like 3 weeks later, that showed an unbelievable amount of mental strength, I guess. So, it's not easy. It is very difficult. So, Liverpool now... I don't think there anyone who doesn't believe that Liverpool will be champions now. I think what it does highlight yesterday is this idea that it's a weak league this season is just total nonsense. Look at West Ham, who are sort of middling around, sort of the
17th, weren't they?
Yeah, mid range in the bottom half.
They won the Conference League 2 years ago.
Yeah, and they've got players like Paqueta, who's absolutely outstanding on the day, and Mohamed Kudus and Jared Bowen, Carlos Soler, they've got all these players who should and could easily be playing for Premier League, Champions League clubs. So I think I mentioned it a few times now. There's probably only maybe 6 games a season where you go into it and you think Liverpool should be comfortable. It's always a real battle, and it's a point that Slot has been making all season. And I think he's spot on. Really, every team or nearly every team will give you a game and could upset you. And, people say it's a bit of a weak league because of the promoter teams have just been sent packing. So, Leicester looks like they're going to go down, Ipswich, and Southampton obviously already relegated. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's a weak league. It means that the teams who are coming up are getting further and further away from the teams who are already in the Premier League. And a lot of it is down to money and the way that money is used, the resources to bring in the best coaches and the best players, because the likes of City and Liverpool and whoever, Arsenal, they can't just hoard 30, 35 top players, can they? So that allows the rest of the league to have a fairer spread of quality players when they're able to bring them in. So I don't actually think the Premier League's ever been of a stronger overall quality, really. The 3 who've come up are going to go back down, and that might be the exact same next season. But for the other 17 clubs, they've all got at least a couple of really top players, and Doyle mentions there Wolves, the run they're on. Mateus Cunha's playing for Brazil, and he's knocking about at a team who've been down the bottom for most of the season. You know, every team has got quality players, and that is why the league is really strong. So for Liverpool to top the lot shows you how good they have been.
I think Ipswich spent 107 million quid in the summer, so it kind of just shows the distribution of wealth that is in the Premier League.
Yeah,
and they're going to finish 18th, and they're 14 points from safety, aren't they? So
there are 4 reasons why the people think the Premier League's rubbish this season. The first one is Man United have been absolutely atrocious. The second one is Tottenham have been even worse. The third one is Nottingham Forest were still third, actually, although the way things are going, they're probably not even going to finish in the top 6, which would be a bit of a shame. And the fourth thing is Arsenal haven't done what they were expected to do, which was to properly challenge for the title, because the reality is they haven't, for whatever reason. You know, I'm sure Arsenal fans have got their reasons for it. They'll say injuries or whatever have you, but as I said before, the reality is they haven't got the squad to compete, and they're just not good enough to compete at those 2 levels. I mean, they might end up winning the Champions League, but they were never going to win the Champions League and the Premier League. And Man City did that 2023, didn't they? Liverpool in 2019 lost the league by 1 point, won the Champions League, and in 2022 lost the league by 1 point and lost the Champions League final. You know, those 2 teams have got an awful lot closer than Arsenal get this year. So I do think there's that. I'm talking about the strength of the Premier League. I'm pretty sure haven't Premier League clubs or England already got the extra space in the Champions League because
that was from Arsenal winning,
because they've done particularly well. I mean, the reality is there's a very good chance that all the Premier League clubs in the Champions League are going to get knocked out by Paris Saint-Germain, or certainly beaten by them. City lost to them in the groups. Liverpool obviously got knocked out. Villa look as though they're going, and then if Arsenal get through and play Paris Saint-Germain and lose, quite a lot of ifs there, but you know that's what would happen.
But that's the expected semi-final now, isn't it? With Arsenal 3-0 up and Paris Saint-Germain 3-1 up.
And what I would say that don't forget Chelsea are way too good to be in the Conference League, so that's kind of skewing the figures a little bit. And United and Tottenham, you know, they've probably put an awful lot of energy into the Europa League because they've realised from a very early stage in the season, Tottenham, because to be fair, they have had quite a lot of injuries, but they do play a slightly odd way. And United obviously got rid of their manager very early on, and they concentrate on this because they know they're going to get nowhere in the Premier League, and they need it for Europe. Actually, don't need to qualify for Europe. They're going to have to do that. So I think it's the same for
Tottenham. Could be in the Champions League next season.
Well, that's the thing.
It's incredible, really, when you think of how poor they've been.
But you know, you speak about last week, and obviously Arsenal beat Real Madrid 3-0. The kind of reaction to that was like, oh my God, this is an incredible performance. Probably the greatest night at the Emirates Stadium since they moved there, 20 odd years ago, whatever. That's the same team Liverpool are going up against for a league title, and they're 13 points clear of them, and they've just dismantled the European champions, haven't they? So it's like,
100%, yeah. And like Doyle mentions there, United and Tottenham still in the Europa League. I think they're 2 of the maybe 3 favourites for the Europa League. Before Thursday's games. So this idea that there is in some way a weak league is just. It's sort of social media tribalism that's filtering
into journalism.
Not necessarily journalism, but more sort of mainstream punditry.
I'd say
journalism. Seems to be
that's journalism.
That some pundits are just throwing out. It's not necessarily true.
But you talk about how well Liverpool have kind of competed. Obviously, they lost to Paris Saint-Germain, but in terms of the Champions League, they did really well in obviously the league stage, and obviously got the win in Paris in the first leg. I mean, that was Arne Slot's 50th game in charge of Liverpool yesterday. 36 wins. This is just the best return of any manager from the first 50 games in charge of Liverpool. Jurgen Klopp got 23, Joe Fagan 29, Kenny Dalglish 29. I mean, Doyle, that just shows how incredible this season has been, not just in the Premier League, but across all competitions, as you said before.
Jim, what I would say on that, don't forget that he inherited
a
team from Klopp. And if you go back to Fagan, he took over a team that had won the league twice, but if you're talking about stumbling towards the finishing line, in 82-83, Liverpool took 2 points in the last 7 games.
Someone's actually already mentioned that to me this morning.
2 points in the last 7 games, including certainly got beat at home by Norwich. I think they may have lost another home game there. You drew with Aston Villa. I know that because I was there when they lifted the title. So yeah, that was 7. I really was 7 once. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's and when they started losing those games, they hadn't technically mathematically won it. It's just that, they kind of stumbled over, but they still won it by about 12 or 13 points, something ridiculous from Watford. And obviously, Kenny Dalglish took over the team after the Heysel disaster, so there was all that as well to deal with. So I'd say Slot has, in a way, the momentum, although you could argue with the way last season ended, but I think the momentum was more with him than the other two in that sense. So it's made it slightly easier. And also, but what for Slot though is that he's come in completely cold. Dalglish was a player at Liverpool, and Fagan had been in the coaching staff for years. So I think any of the advantages I just mentioned before completely wiped out. I think is a remarkable achievement for him to win that many games in this league that, as we've just mentioned, is quite clearly the best league in Europe.
And also as well, you can sort of write off at least 3 of those defeats. Certainly 2 of them. Tottenham in the League Cup, which they won the second leg. PSV in the Champions League, they were already qualified and then won the group anyway. And then the FA Cup at Plymouth was, for me, not a great, certainly no tears shed from that one. So, that means his record looks even more impressive when you think at least particularly 2 of those were almost meaningless defeats, if there ever is such a thing.
And I suppose with Slot as well, there's stuff you can't quantify. Is the players had obviously been with Klopp for so long to kind of come in and put your own stamp on the team, put your own style of play, and get the players to all buy into that, because it must be, everyone said this season, it must be so difficult to take over someone as charismatic as Jurgen Klopp, isn't it, Gorsty?
Yeah, I've just been looking back actually, and there was an open training session they did in Philadelphia in July, and normally open training sessions when the media are allowed to see it, you've done them, Doyle. For Champions League games, it's just a little bit of going through the motions. They do a few warm-ups, a few passes, and then they go away behind the curtain and do the proper stuff. And I think that's what a lot of us were expecting that day at Lincoln Financial Field. But it was a full-on training session. It was like an hour long, and Slot really got to work them, and we were all pitchside watching him. And you could see he was trying to implement this idea of possession and not just trying to go hell for leather every time you had the ball, because ultimately you're not going to score every time you do that, and how much of a knock-on effect that has on your energy reserves game to game, and then longer in the season. We saw Liverpool fall away, didn't we, with their injuries, and sort of tailed off when it really mattered, really, this time last year, wasn't it? So he was immediately trying to sort of reshape the mindset of the group, that they didn't have to go blood and thunder every time they had the ball. And we could really see what he was trying to do just in that hour. And then obviously, as he's continuing to sort of bring that style in over the weeks and the months, we saw it against Ipswich, didn't we? And we've pretty much seen it every game since, that Liverpool are very different now. There was always this idea that Slot was chosen to succeed Klopp because he was considered the most similar in terms of a playing style. But I think that's been exaggerated a little bit. I think seeing the 2 teams in action at their best, the 2 very different styles, and one isn't necessarily better than the other. People might prefer one to the other or whatever else, but what you can say is he's got unbelievable results out of the squad that's not even his. So I think it's bodes well for what comes next, and with some sort of little bit of contrasting opinions on this. Virgil van Dijk said to us yesterday he thinks the club are planning for a big summer. I think Slot said to you on Friday that not necessarily going to be making loads of incomings, but I think it'll be exciting to see what happens next. Obviously, as champions, and then then Slot really gets to work on creating his squad.
And Doyle, Gorsty talks then about the style of play, and obviously having more kind of in the gas tank in the latter stages of the season. When we saw that yesterday, as soon as West Ham went to 1-1, Liverpool were able to kind of turn the screw and go again, weren't they? I mean, straight away, they kind of went up the other end. I think Kwanzaa has a shot, he comes to Diaz, he hits the bar, goes for the corner, and then they score practically 30 seconds later. So that style of play kind of allows Liverpool, doesn't it, to kind of have a bit of energies in reserve, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, kind of the fact that Slot won't rotate half his team is kind of negated. Although he did on Sunday, didn't he? Made the 4 changes. So just going back to what we talked about before about the strength of the Premier League. I mean, Ipswich are quite clearly not very good, but they've taken 4 points off Chelsea. Southampton are. I think, can they still be the worst team in the Premier League history?
No, they went level on Saturday.
Right. So, and
how did they finish on Saturday?
They got beat 3-0. Yeah. I think Villa missed 2 penalties as well.
There was nil, wasn't it, half time?
Yeah. So is it 11? Is it 11? Yeah.
So they need another point
it's Monday
to go
now,
level.
don't you?
Yeah.
Just about. And the point I was going to make, Southampton won, but they beat Everton in one of their games. But Everton drew with Liverpool, drew twice with Arsenal, beat Nottingham Forest, who were 3rd. So that shows you, that it's difficult to call it beyond Liverpool and to a certain extent Arsenal. A lot of the teams are kind of milling around the same kind of ballpark, as it were. A lot of teams can beat each other, and that the fact that that's the case. I think Arsenal have lost 3 times, Liverpool have lost twice. These are the 2 best teams in the league, and that Liverpool are so far clear of Arsenal to show that they will end up being deserved champions. I've actually just spoken to John Aldridge for his column without giving too much away. He says, basically, it would be nice if Liverpool could just kind of finish with a flourish, just to finally just remind everybody that this is a team that won 3-0 at Man United, that beat Man City 2-0 home and away, that won 6-3 at Tottenham.
I think that'll happen as well. I think they will get over the line, and then I think they will be a little bit more liberated. I don't think it'll be a case of them dropping off
at Leicester
in the way that they did maybe in 2020 when Man City beat them quite handily, didn't they? Almost immediately after the title had been won, and then I think they drew at home to Burnley and just sort of milled about until the season was over, really, didn't they? I don't think that'll happen. I think it'll be the opposite, really. I think they will be sort of emboldened by the fact that they are champions and then go
be rolled on by Anfield, won't they? And
then really finish with a flourish.
I think they finished with 99 points that season, so it wasn't as if they just...
No. I'm not saying it was in any way a sort of huge drop off, but until Watford in February, they hadn't lost, had they? And they'd only dropped 2 points.
And Burnley was the only home game they didn't win at Anfield that season, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there was no one there either.
Yeah.
And the referee that day?
David Coote.
Indeed, yes.
I think Robertson made his feelings quite clear to him, didn't he? We are live on YouTube, so do send your questions in. We've got a question here from Mr. David Lynch, who says, any word from Doyle on his prediction that Arsenal would win 7 of their last 8? Us loyal listeners deserve an apology. So, Doyle, the floor is yours.
This is David Lynch of freelance fame, formerly of Turned Up on Our Podcast Now and Again fame.
Freelance fame, I like that.
Yeah, freelance fame. If you can go and watch his YouTube channel if you want, although other YouTube channels are available, such as this one.
Is this your way of getting around an apology, is it?
No, I'm not apologising to him, no. He owes me a £5 anyway.
Do I still owe you a £5?
No, actually, it's you that owe me a £10.
Do I?
Yeah. You owe me a £10. You doubled up on it and got it wrong.
Did I, yeah?
Yeah, I don't owe him anything. I gave him a £5.
In terms of...
Okay, sorry, right, the question. I've managed to... Basically, when we did the Echo, the last couple of weeks we've been doing, after every single game, we've been doing a predict how you think the season's going to finish. You can guess all the scores. So I just put, I think Arsenal win all their games. To prove a point, actually, Arsenal win all their games, apart from drawing at Anfield, and Liverpool, I think they drew at Fulham and get beat at Chelsea and drew at Brighton and drew a home game against Tottenham, something silly like that. They still won it by 5 points. So I was trying to prove a point, but, I think Lynchy just needs to pipe down back in his Greater Manchester stronghold.
Should invite him on the pod.
Again, no, he's done his bit. He's had his chance.
He's
too busy. Anyway, don't. Go on.
Of course, you were speaking before about Liverpool finishing with a flourish. I think that was probably the nice thing about yesterday is that they had that moment of like a late winner. I've seen a lot of people on social media say it kind of felt like maybe this season, because it's been so kind of clean in terms of results, it's not felt like there's been a spike, but that Van Dijk header after a bit of adversity beforehand was a real nice let-off, wasn't it?
100%, yeah. I wrote it in the verdict. Actually, it felt like the only thing missing from this title procession was the captain scoring the winner at the top end, and, that's, Steven Gerrard used to do that as a matter of routine, didn't he? And it was good to see Virgil popping up with the all-important contribution at the end. It was weird, wasn't it, the way Liverpool just drifted and allowed West Ham to come back into it and allowed the likes of Paqueta and Kudus to get on the ball and start dictating, and then they were deserving of an equaliser at the very least, really. Alisson makes a couple of really good saves. But then as soon as West Ham equalised, it was like the switch flicked and Liverpool decided that they wanted to go and win it. So strange how that sometimes happens. I do think the atmosphere was impacted by a little bit. There seems to be quite a bit of anxiety that set in, and I think that'll always be the case. I think Liverpool fans are just sort of conditioned, aren't they, to be fearful when it really gets to title crunch time because they've been burned so many times before. But it's not going to happen this year. So, how much of a liberating thing that'll be for next season, whatever else we'll see. But yeah, it was a real sort of, felt like a big moment. Probably a bigger moment than it was, really, considering Liverpool, even if they'd have drawn the game, will still be sort of sauntering to the title. But it was celebrated as though it was, the goal that took Liverpool 3 points clear rather than 13.
And maybe a goal to celebrate a new contract that might be coming, Doyle?
Well, you never know, do you? You never do. No, exactly. Except in this case, you do actually. No, he's quite clearly signing a contract.
I was just going to throw it to you, Gorst, maybe get a less diplomatic answer, but
Yeah.
I mean, kisses the badge.
Yeah, I mean, kissing the badge, it felt like a bit of a symbol of commitment, didn't it? As though it was
He's
needed.
trying to clean his lips.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't needed. We spoke to him again after the game. He's still not saying yes, but yeah, we are expecting confirmation at some stage this week. Won't be tomorrow, but any time after that, we could be looking at a 2-year extension for Virgil van Dijk.
He did get a kiss off Andy Robertson, so what does that tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still not sure whose fault that was. I think both were unhappy with
It
each
looked
other,
like
weren't they?
Van Dijk looked like he showed us some of the blame. Obviously, Robertson was screaming at him on the replays, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And Van Dijk kind of walked off with his head down. So I think Robertson's probably giving him a shout, and obviously Van Dijk tried to flick it round away, hasn't he? And it's kind of...
I think Robertson was maybe a little bit frustrated that it was him who was the fall guy, given the... he's been at the centre of a number of crimes this season, hasn't he? And maybe it's a bit of an unfair general perception of him because he has had good performances in there. But yeah, it's I'm glad that it was rectified anyway, and wasn't to be a sort of one of them ones where you're picking the bones out of it and you're having to sort of question Robertson and you all that sort of stuff. You can just sort of forget about it and move on.
And Doyle, just say, if Van Dijk does sign a new contract this week, obviously follows on from Mohamed Salah last week, that's the kind of 2/3 of these contract sagas have come to an end. I mean, how important is that for Liverpool? We saw the quality, if anyone needed reminded yesterday, of what Salah can still offer, and I'm sure Van Dijk will do the same, won't he?
Sorry, I thought the question. Sorry.
Well into his new contract, I'm sure Van Dijk will continue at that level as Salah kind of did yesterday to kickstart his new deal.
Well, they better add another 2 years. So I think that's the kind of faith Liverpool have got in. By the way, our producer Ian has just let out a massive yawn. Are we keeping you up here?
I'm slightly tired today, sorry.
Slightly tired, yeah. You're unprofessional. Yeah. I mean, okay, let's deal with Trent. Trent's obviously, he's probably not going to sign his contract, is he? Let's be honest. So I think from that point of view, Liverpool can now press ahead, as we said last week when Salah signed his contract, with what they need to do in the summer, going back to what Paul referred to, made reference to a little bit earlier about Slot, is that you spoke to him before the game on Friday, and so I basically asked him about his relationship with Richard Hughes now. How's that going ahead of a potentially busy summer? And he went, "Oh, who says it's going to be busy?" So whether that's just being the
doing a Slot contrary,
yeah, exactly. Whether the contrary Slot, which I think he's picked that up from John Barnes, because whenever you interview John Barnes, he's lovely day, John, isn't it? Well, is it?
Yeah. Oh, they're your words.
That's basically what he said. He said, you're saying that. I'm not saying that. But yes, well, at least that's 2 signings they won't have to make. One centre back and one right winger. Sorry,
but probably 2 of the most. I think people have obviously moved their rankings this season, but I think for everyone, or a lot of people, certainly Van Dijk and Salah were the top 2 that if you had to kind of nail them down to new contracts, it was for different reasons to Trent. Obviously, Trent's a local lad. He was the future of the club. But in terms of, I still think Van Dijk was a transformative signing for Liverpool. I don't think they would have won everything had he not signed all those years ago, despite Salah's goals, despite how good Alisson was.
Yeah, I mean, you can't replace Salah's goals, can you? Look at his goal contribution. What is it now? 23 assists, I think, 32 goals in all competitions. So you're going to have to find a way to sort of work around that to offset the loss of no Mo Salah, which is, practically impossible. And then you've got Van Dijk, who's been one of the leading centre-backs in European football, if not the best, certainly over the last 5 years, if not even longer, sort of 7 or 8 even. So, yeah, both of those are irreplaceable, really. I think what Liverpool have done have given themselves some breathing room, some time and space to figure out who the eventual successors are for these 2 players, while still retaining them and still seeing them put in the sort of performances as they have done this season. Because I think Liverpool are convinced that neither are going to fall off a cliff, because they wouldn't have given them the new deals otherwise. But I still think we can't underplay the loss of Alexander-Arnold if and when he does go to Real Madrid. It's a little bit sort of offset by the fact that Slot's fullbacks are different to what Jurgen Klopp's were, and they're a little bit more orthodox, and there's not too much of a reliance on them to create and to get assists. But still, having that X factor not on your team will be massive for Liverpool next season. We saw how much Liverpool missed them in the Carabao Cup final, for example, and how much it impacted things when he went off against Paris Saint-Germain. I thought he was just sort of starting to get into his stride there in that second half, and off he goes with that injury that he's still sidelined with. So, yeah, I don't think we can sort of underplay how significant it is if he leaves as well. I still think Conor Bradley will be a really good, backup plan to have there, and then you can maybe look to bring in some creativity elsewhere on the pitch. But losing Trent is a body blow for Liverpool. You can't really sugarcoat that too much.
I suppose in terms of underlining the other two and that, knowing that they're sticking around for next season and obviously the season after, that's only a boost for Liverpool. That kind of noise will now start to kind of slowly fade away, won't it?
Well, for a season, then it'll start again.
But not in the same manner that this season was. I mean, you're talking about a matter of weeks from this, the end of June when they're out of contract. I think 12 months for players in their mid-30s is probably quite normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that, but we know what people are like. Certainly if the two players continue to be as important for Liverpool as they are at the moment, which, I'll be honest, human nature suggests they're going to slow down at some point. And that's going to be sooner rather than later. But what it's done is given Liverpool 2 years to buy the replacements. And I think that's the real big thing for Liverpool, is that even if they bring them in next year, they've got a year to learn from the pair of them. If they bring one of them, possibly, I don't know, maybe a centre-back this summer, and then you got 2 years to learn from Van Dijk. And, it's like you working alongside me and Paul. You're learning from the best.
Mm.
So
I was brought in to bring the average age down.
Exactly, exactly. Exactly, yeah. Your succession planning, yeah. You can take over from
All
us.
good businesses do it.
They do, and this one as well.
Absolutely. Moving on. I thought yesterday, Gorsty, the moment obviously Salah's name is read out, I thought that was a really nice moment, a really big reception. Obviously, he always gets a big reception because of who he is and what he's done for the club, but to kind of have that moment, and then even when he was subbed off at the end, he got a really nice ovation. Obviously, Liverpool conceded straight after, which obviously wasn't ideal, but it was nice for Salah to kind of have that celebration, wasn't it, in that moment, and also a really good performance, probably one of his better ones in recent weeks.
Yeah, it's just little things that Liverpool do regarding Mo Salah that just help keep him happy and sort of, on it, essentially. I remember when he scored the goal against United in the 7-0, was it, to become the club's all-time leading scorer of the Premier League era. And George Shefton sort of read it out after it was, the feat had been achieved. And Peter McDowell yesterday before kick-off sort of making sure that he was the last player read out and, making sure that the cop gave him a massive sort of ovation for it as well. They just do little things like that just to fluff his ego, essentially. And there's nothing wrong with doing it. It's just a way that keeps him happy and keeps him, like I say, ready to perform. So, yeah, it was good. And I thought he was better, actually, certainly first half, than he has been in recent weeks. A little bit quiet second half, as everyone was, really. But first half, he gave Ollie Scholes a ton of time, really, didn't he? The young fullback. And the assist was brilliant, just to sort of let it run across his body, get away from his man, put it into an area that I think it was meant for Jota, really, but he just sort of just couldn't quite
nailed
get
that
there,
outside of the boot pass, hasn't he?
Yeah,
over the last
it was just so nonchalant. I saw a replay of it before from the reverse angle, and he just knocks it across like he's just kicking it down the road, and then Diaz sticks it away. And what is it? His 23rd assist of the season now. There was a stat yesterday which I can't actually quite remember exactly what it was, but I think he's got the most goal contributions now in a 38-game season.
Yeah.
So
he's 4 off Shearer in a 42 game, isn't he? I think.
Yeah, right. I mean, you wouldn't bet against him doing that now, would you? With 6 games to go, so yeah, I thought he was better certainly first half, and it was easy, wasn't it, for people to say is the contract situation having an effect on his recent form? Certainly since maybe the PSG game away, where he hasn't quite been at the same levels that he's been at for the all the games previous, but yesterday was a bit more like it first half, and fully expecting to carry that on against Leicester at the weekend.
I always do feel with Salah, though, that he always peaks quite early in the season, though.
Yeah.
He kind of racks up those numbers, and you think, he's on for a 40-goal, 40 assist campaign.
Once, yeah.
And then he kind of just slows down, doesn't he? I remember 2022 was quite the same, wasn't it?
But that difference, though, 2022, he had AFCON.
Yeah.
2024, he got injured. AFCON. 2023, there was the World Cup in the middle, which obviously wasn't involved, but that did kind of change things a bit. 2021, I seem to remember he did quite well towards the end there when they were actually, trying to chase down that Champions League place. So, I wrote
8 of the last 10, didn't he? 3 of the other 2.
Yeah, I wrote something on this the last week, actually. Funny enough, it came out the day that he signed his deal. I think we put it in the paper in the morning. Basically saying that, but the point is, he's done it. He's done his bit now. If Liverpool go and win the league, he doesn't have to score any more goals if he doesn't want to.
I think what has been inspired for Salah really was the idea to miss the Olympics in favour of having a full pre-season at Liverpool and sort of really getting used to what Slot wants from his forwards and the team in general. And I think he's planning something similar this summer. I think he's chosen not to go with Egypt on the June internationals, is he? So he can have a good break and then another proper pre-season. I think he sees that as key to him being able to sort of hit the ground running in the seasons. And then once that happens, you get in your momentum and your rhythm. And then that's how he ends up having these sorts of autumns and winter where he's just, the main man, certainly in the Premier League and maybe even world football. So, that seems to have been the one that's massively paid off for him. And yeah, he has slowed down in recent weeks. I don't think you can sort of ignore the fact that he observes Ramadan. And, obviously the club work around that with the intake of water and however it works. I'm not too sure. It'd be fascinating to hear how they work around that specifically, but it's probably going to have an impact at some stage, isn't it? But yeah, he's. I thought yesterday he was much more like his I say old self. The sort of the form he was at maybe earlier in the season.
I think athletes can have a partial exemption, can't they?
Yeah,
from it.
But some of them don't always. You can if you want, but I don't think a lot of them take up on that.
Yeah.
And you got to think as well, he'd be getting up early to break his fast and whatnot, so you won't be sleeping for the whole duration, would you? But I think the thing that really impressed me with Salah Doyle is that how many times he's reinvented himself in a Liverpool shirt. You think of when he first came, he was just an absolute numbers machine, which he still is now, but he was quite selfish in his play. Now he's obviously become I think obviously on course to win the Playmaker Award?
Playmaker Award,
which he's won once or twice already. So
what the hell was the Playmaker Award? That's just made
up.
Most assists.
I mean, I know they're all made up, but that sounds particularly made
up.
up.
My point being is that every time when you think, he relies a lot on his kind of physicality or his pace or whatever, he kind of slowly reinvents himself as a more of a team player. And
with the emphasis on slowly, because he hasn't quite got the pace that he used to have. Although, as you saw on Sunday, he can still run away from children. He was very young, wasn't he?
The way he uses his body. I mean, he gets away from him down the line, but initially
so strong, isn't he?
Yeah, he just kind of does that dummy, which gives him 5 yards.
That's because he's always getting battered by a lot of defenders who are a lot more canny than the young lad he played for West Ham, Scales, isn't he? Yeah. Scales, Oliver Scales. I think I saw him play actually one of his first games. It was on telly, and I thought he's quite good. So
to be fair, he won't have many hard
exactly.
Salah,
that's exactly what Graham Potter said after the game. He said he'll learn from it, and I'm not going to say he felt sorry for him, but you certainly felt. I don't think he was that fussed when he got subbed, should we say? And of course, the irony there being he could have stayed on because Liverpool didn't really do much attacking in the second half until the end. So. No, it was a big moment for him.
Wan-Bissaka went left wing back, didn't he?
That's right, yeah.
Well, my point being, with Salah now signing this new deal, it gives you hope that even if he is kind of slowly deteriorating...
What I would say about both Salah and to a lesser extent Van Dijk, I wouldn't expect them to play as many games next season and the season after as they've done this season, because I think that Liverpool need to start looking at these two and going, right, we've got them for 2 more years now, we need to use them. But I'm not talking rest them every other week.
I think that's certainly going to be the case with Salah, and how he reacts to no longer being the main man every week will be interesting. I think Van Dijk, you can cover that a little bit more, can't you, with midfield protection and fullbacks who maybe stick in a little bit further and he does less running because he's only a centre-back. But with Salah, it will be interesting to see how that works out.
And...
Go on, we'll fill for you. Go on.
Say again.
Go on. I've
got a few questions here that I was just
thought the answers weren't as long as you were expecting there.
No, I was just reading.
You're looking at your screen.
Doyle, we've got a question here. It says, can anyone see Arsenal pulling back all those points to beat Liverpool to the title? I specifically want to ask that one to Doyle.
Arsenal have not been title favourites ever since that West Ham game. And you'd have to be a very silly person to suggest that otherwise.
And one question I just wanted to ask you both. You talk about rotation maybe being more of a key factor next season. What do you think kind of the main lessons Slot will take away from this kind of debut season at Liverpool and in the Premier League?
Yeah, I think it will be that. And I don't think it's necessarily... he will feel he has to rotate more. I think he will feel he has to have more players that he can trust. And for whatever reason, there are a few who are sort of on the fringes who he doesn't quite. Endo, we know, has got a very specific role in the squad to come on and just keep it tight and see out the game as it is in that state at that particular time. But he hasn't started a Premier League game.
Elliott as well has only played a handful of
Elliott
minutes,
as well.
hasn't
Yeah. Elliott's been a little bit unfortunate with the timing of his injury and stuff, but for whatever reason, Slot doesn't necessarily think that he is someone who we can rely on either, more regularly. So certainly those two. Tsimikas sort of had a little bit of a go, didn't he, to begin with, and then Andy Robertson won that battle. So wouldn't be surprised if we've spoken about it at length that Liverpool do look to bring in a left back there, and maybe Tsimikas seeks pastures new. But yeah, it's I think that will be the thing. Not necessarily that he feels he has to rotate more. He will need more players to be able to rotate, if that makes sense.
Doyle, does that come back to signing the players and making it his own squad? I suppose if, in the summer you say he brings in a left back and another midfielder, he'll bring in players that he wants at the club, if that makes sense. So maybe then his pool of players he trusts goes from 14 to 18, which then in turn leaves Salah and Van Dijk with a few more occasions to be rested, doesn't it?
Well, they only signed one player, and that's Chiesa, who he hasn't played from the start in the Premier League and doesn't really play him very often in anything else, to be honest. So it's basically been none of his players. I think this is just my theory on Harvey Elliott, and literally just me making this up, by the way. Although it could be right, a broken clock and all that. I think he's not played that often this season because I don't think that Slot thinks that Gravenberch and McAllister have the complete physicality to compete in the Premier League. That's why Szoboszlai, and to a certain lesser extent Jones, plays, because Jones is reasonably strong, but Szoboszlai is somebody who gets around the pitch and knocks people over. I think Harvey Elliott, for all his talent, is because of his stature, he's never going to do that. So I don't think, and someone's now going to point out there was a game already this season, but I don't think you'd ever see a midfield where it's Elliott, Gravenberch and McAllister. And I think until they sign another defensive midfielder, because clearly, as you mentioned, he doesn't really want to play Endo. I can't see Elliott playing a load of games, and it may end up being that Elliott goes because he's not going to sign a midfielder, and you just have to bring somebody else with a different kind of profile for the number 10. Although you could argue you could play Szoboszlai as one of the other two.
Yeah, we haven't seen that much, have we?
Yeah. In terms of profiles on a player, is this something you talk about? Defensive midfielder, would that be someone the same style as Gravenberch, or would it be someone more natural? Would you want Doyle? Or?
Depends what he wants. I mean, you look at it and you go, well, he played Curtis there in his first game, didn't he? Against Preston behind closed doors. I think he started, didn't he? He did play Szoboszlai and Curtis there in the summer. Gravenberch then came in for the last couple of games, did quite well, and he's not moved from there. McAllister's already played there loads of times for Brighton and Argentina, so that kind of is his position. He knows how to play it, and he's hardly one who doesn't like getting stuck in. In fact, I think every single game he's on the floor for about 3 times and been booted up in the air by somebody, and he keeps coming back for more. But the game's changed. It's not like even someone like Fabinho. Would Fabinho been playing in this team? That's a very good question that I think I can't have an answer to, but I'll ask it to you too.
I think peak Fabinho would have fit in, yeah. But he was very much more traditional in terms of a defensive midfielder, wasn't he? I don't think Slot necessarily wants someone who's a bit of a destroyer, a bit of a yard dog who goes around winning tackles and basically keeping it short. Otherwise, we would have seen Endo a bit more, I think. I think he wants someone who's comfortable taking it in tight situations in difficult areas of the pitch and is able to keep possession and keep it taken over. And Ryan Gravenberch certainly is able to do that. And McAllister, as Doyle mentioned, is superb, really. He's had a fantastic season, hasn't he? And I think we're starting to see we have seen it all season, really, the mentality that he's got, as a World Cup winner for Argentina. You can't just sort of gloss over that fact. That's a serious accolade to have on your CV, and he's been brilliant. I think those two there are sort of ideally settled, but I think Liverpool do need another player at least to rest and rotate. So those two in particular aren't running to the ground as they sort of have been in the last couple of months.
And the reality is whether or not I would quite fancy having someone who's in there to boot people up in the air like Milner or Fabinho. Slot doesn't want that, and Liverpool are 13 points clear at the top of the Premier League, so I'm pretty sure he knows more about it than I do.
And in terms of other positions, Doyle, Gorst even, where would you be looking at? Obviously, left back feels like quite an obvious one.
Yeah, left back, number 9 is the one for me. I've said it for months now. It sounds like a bit of a broken record, but that has to be the first priority this summer. Darwin Núñez, 3 seasons in, I think it's fair to say he looks further away than ever to make the grade at Liverpool. Jota's been more missed than hit, shall we say. Had a tough season with injuries and hasn't quite been on it since that injury at Chelsea, really. So that is the position that Liverpool needs to fix for me. And I'm not too sure about right back. I'm convinced that Conor Bradley can, if he can keep fit, that he can be a really good, useful player for Liverpool on that right side. So I'm not as overly concerned about the need for a right back, but I think they'll bring in a left back as well.
I suppose obviously it depends what happens with Quansah as well. He's played there a few times. Jones in recent weeks has gone to right back as well. And when you talk about Slot system wanting footballers, Jones probably ticks that, doesn't he? He's an intelligent footballer. He's comfortable receiving the ball anywhere, isn't he? And you saw that when he played at right back the other night in the derby.
Slot gave something away when he was asked about that last week, where he said, we're looking at, I was speaking with Richard Hughes and we spoke about the value of versatile players. So
yeah,
I would imagine he might be looking at, for argument's sake, this is just me guessing again, somebody who can play right back and can play centre mid, a defensive mid. That would be kind of like the ideal for him. In terms of the question that you asked Gorsty, they've already got a keeper coming in. I think they need a striker, definitely. I think they don't definitely need a left back, but it would help. I think they're probably going to need a right back somebody who can compete with Bradley if this assuming Trent goes. And I think they need a midfielder, and then last on the list would be a centre back. But again, that depends what happens with Canati. We were talking about this before, weren't we?
Yeah,
Saying,
you've got an inkling about Canati, haven't you?
No, that's just not
an inkling. But
it's just a feeling that if Canati does not stay, in the sense that he's about to enter the last 12 months of his contract, we've heard rumours of Paris Saint-Germain being interested. He's a Paris lad. As he's never been called before, like Paris lad.
Paris lad.
Yeah, Paris lad.
The Parisian.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And Real Madrid have been kind of sniffing around, but they never spend any money on players. They just want to take them on a free transfer. I think Liverpool don't want that to happen again. So it could be that Liverpool use that as an opportunity to go, okay, well, we know Virgil's going to be here for the next couple of years. And if Canati wants to go, we can spend a bit of money on, for argument's sake, the lad from Bournemouth.
Oyshen.
Now, where that's interesting is that Liverpool were quite willing to spend quite a lot of money on getting Yoro in from Lille, wasn't it? Yeah, Lille. And they thought he was going to Real Madrid, and he ended up at Man United because he wanted to play games. And he's, I know United have been pretty rubbish again all season, but he looks reasonably decent actually for somebody who's still only a teenager.
And to be fair, United, I think at the time it was thought they overpaid a bit for Yoro in terms of his experience.
But you were always going to do
52 million they paid, yeah.
But with that Oyshen, he's played in the best league in the world.
This is the point. So if you say, again, argument's sake, you get about 35 to 40 million for Canati, you can then spend that money on Oyshen, even though he's not got the experience of Canati, but then Canati hardly played in the Premier League in his first season at Liverpool. And don't forget, he's got Quansah, who, while he's not played much this season, Liverpool are planning on him being around next season because they don't want him to go to Newcastle, for example. He's an England international now.
I think with Quansah that's really interesting is that he was not frozen out, but he was on the periphery for so much of the season, but he's ultimately got back into it. And I know he's been not fortunate, but his opportunity has come via injuries to Trent and to Bradley and whatnot. But clearly there's a player there that Slot likes because he wouldn't play him otherwise. He could do Curtis Jones there.
Yeah.
I think with other players you've seen, Elliott and even Endo, they haven't had those opportunities, whereas Quansah's now he's starting games, he's coming on in games, he's coming out to see games, isn't he?
Yeah, no, you're right. And you'd almost think if he has his Liverpool career in reverse, you think, what kind of player Liverpool got on the hands here? He's just maybe a little bit sort of trying to think of the phrase, but because his first season was so good last year, it almost feels like he's being judged unfairly with what has come since. But he's only 22. He's got a long-term future at Liverpool with the contract, and fully expect him to be a big part of the future at centre-back. And just going back to that Dean Huijsen chat, I remember speaking to someone over the summer who was explaining that Liverpool value Sepp van den Berg at a certain price point because of, in part, Huijsen's move from Juventus to Bournemouth. And, we know that Richie Hughes will have very good knowledge of the details of that transaction and the contract and all that stuff. So there's a lot about that which makes sense. Liverpool are clearly aware of what he can do and his ability. But I think he's only played maybe sort of 45, 50 senior games in football, and Liverpool tend, at those sorts of prices, prefer them to have upwards of 125 to 175, even 200. So I'm not sure either way if Liverpool would think that would be a wise investment for the long term at he's got a release clause, we believe, don't we, of 50 million, or whether they think he might need another year just to sort of, you know, get a few wrinkles out of his game. But then you run the risk of, I guess, Real Madrid getting involved because there has been links to them as well, and he's just become a full Spain international as well, hasn't he? So, he seems to be someone who has a big future.
If Quansah played as he does for Liverpool at somewhere like Bournemouth, Liverpool would be being linked with him now. So that gives you an answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's everything we've got time for on today's episode of the Blood Red podcast. Thank you to Gorsty.
That was quite an abrupt ending.
Well, I was hoping we'd have some questions come through, but we haven't had a great deal of any transfer chat, which is...
Do we still do that? No person of the week, should we do
I
it?
forgot about that.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think we've done that in
let's
months.
The prestigious Nordies.
Yeah, except the Nordy. We have to do an end of season. When we do our end of season awards, they're definitely sponsoring it.
Right, well, we won't end it here. We'll do the no person of the week. Gorsty.
I'm going to give mine to Virgil van Dijk.
I'm going to give mine to Mohamed Salah.
Kroll.
Not giving between Kroll. No, that would be
Well, that is everything we've got time for on today's episode of the Blood Red podcast. Thank you to Paul Gorst and Ian Doyle for joining me. Until next time, which will be
Thursday,
yeah.
Before Liverpool could potentially...
Audio only as well.
Audio
Because why? You're not here, are you? Bone idle.
Well,
Yeah, I don't know.
could be the final podcast before Liverpool Premier League champions.
Could be,
It could be, yeah.
And it's going to be on audio only.
Yeah, I know. Whose fault's that, eh?
Right, well, we will see you on Thursday. So thank you very much for listening.